The morning air by the lake has a certain kind of quiet. You know the one I mean? A mix of pine and damp earth, so still you can hear a fish jump 100 yards away. I was on my porch, coffee hot in my hands, watching the mist burn off the water. At 52, you learn to appreciate these moments. They are the currency you trade your younger, wilder years for. That peace lasted exactly until the crunch of gravel under heavy tires broke the spell. A pristine, white SUV, the kind that never sees a speck of mud, pulled into my driveway. Brenda stepped out of the driver's side. If you're watching Karenology, you probably already have a picture in your head. And you're probably right. 40-something blonde hair sprayed into a helmet that could survive a hurricane, holding a clipboard like it was a royal scepter. She had that smile that doesn't reach the eyes. A predator's smile. Two guys in work jumpsuits got out of the passenger side, looking bored. I didn't get up, just took a slow sip of my coffee. "Morning, Brenda. Little early for a parade, isn't it?" She ignored my tone, her smile tightening. "Mark, we have a situation." She gestured toward the two men, who were now walking onto my lawn, heading for the old oak tree that's been here longer than this entire neighborhood. One of them was holding a can of spray paint. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What kind of situation involves you and two guys on my property at 7 in the morning?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "It's a trick you learn. The calmer you sound, the more they hate it." Brenda tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "The Environmental Committee has determined there's a significant septic leak originating from your property. It's contaminating the lake." I almost laughed. I'm a hydrogeologist. I've spent 30 years studying how water moves through the ground. My septic system was state-of-the-art, less than 2 years old, installed under my own obsessive supervision. "That's impossible, Brenda. I have the permits, the inspection reports. My system is sealed tighter than a drum." As I spoke, the man with the can raised it. A bright, sickeningly red cross bloomed on the trunk of my oak. The hiss of the spray paint was the only sound in the quiet morning. It felt like a physical blow. That tree was where my daughter had her swing set. It was where my wife and I carved our initials 30 years ago. My hands started to shake, so I set the coffee mug down on the railing. I stood up slowly. "What do you think you're doing?" Brenda's voice was as cold as the morning air. "We've declared an emergency. The Homeowners Association will be contracting an immediate replacement of the main sewer lines for this section. And since your property is the source of the contamination, you're responsible for the special assessment." She slid a single sheet of paper from her clipboard and held it out. My eyes drifted past her to the workbench inside my house. My old fluorometer was sitting there, a relic from a past life, a past mistake, a constant reminder of what happens when you trust the data but forget about the people. I felt that old ghost stir in my gut. "Special assessment?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "How much?" Brenda's smile finally reached her eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She knew she had me, or at least, she thought she did. $15,000, due in 30 days. She then glanced at the red cross on my beautiful ancient oak. "That's a beautiful tree, Mark. It'll be a shame to tear it down for the new pipes." Have you ever had a moment where everything goes silent, and all you can hear is the blood rushing in your ears? That was me, right then. 15 grand. A lie about my property. And a threat to something I loved, all gift-wrapped in a smug smile before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. If this is already hitting a little too close to home, maybe hit that like button. You have a feeling this is just the beginning. She and her goons got back in their white SUV and drove off, leaving the scent of chemical paint hanging in the air. I walked over to the oak, my hand hovering over the wet, red paint. It was an act of war. This wasn't about a septic system. This was about power. And I knew, standing there in the ruins of my peaceful morning, that this was going to get ugly. I just didn't know how ugly yet. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, digging through my files, pulling every permit, every inspection certificate, every blueprint. I was a man with a purpose. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. You don't come onto a man's land and tell him lies about his own trade. You just don't. That evening, there was an emergency meeting of the Homeowners Association. I walked in there armed with a briefcase full of facts, ready for a logical adult conversation. What I got instead was a public execution. And Brenda? She was holding the axe. She stood there, waiting for me, her clipboard in hand. Brenda stood there, waiting for me, her clipboard in hand. The community hall was packed, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and anxiety. I saw faces I'd known for 20 years, people I'd had over for barbecues, people whose kids grew up with mine. Tonight, they looked at me like I was a stranger, a threat. They weren't my neighbors anymore. They were a jury. I walked to the front, my briefcase clicking open on the folding table. "Evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady. "I know why we're here, and I want to set the record straight." I laid out the documents one by one, the signed permits from the county, the schematics for the septic system, the final inspection report, stamped and approved. This is a closed-loop polymer line system. It's physically impossible for it to leak into the lake unless there's a seismic event. And trust me, we'd know. I spoke clearly, calmly. I was in my element, talking about facts, about physics. I thought logic would prevail. What a fool I was. Have you ever tried to reason with a tidal wave? Brenda let me finish. She let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long before she stepped forward. She didn't even look at my documents. She just smiled that icy smile at the crowd. "Mark is a very passionate man," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But what he's not telling you is that our bylaws, which we all agreed to, have a provision for this exact scenario." She held up her clipboard. Section 114B states that any decision made by the Environmental Committee based on a visual inspection regarding potential hazards is binding and not subject to appeal at a General Assembly. A murmur went through the crowd. Visual inspection? You mean the guy with the spray can? That was their evidence? It was a perfect bureaucratic kill shot. My mountain of evidence was worthless. She had used their own rules, their own fear, against them. And against me. A neighbor in the back shouted, "So what are we waiting for? My property value is on the line." That's all it took. The dam broke. Suddenly, I wasn't Mark, the guy who helps you jumpstart your car in winter. I was the problem, the man who was going to cost them money. I felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me, heavy with suspicion and resentment. It was the most profound kind of loneliness, being publicly abandoned by your own tribe. I packed my briefcase, the clicks of the latches echoing in the hostile silence. I had lost. The debt was now official, $15,000, with a $50 a day penalty for non-compliance. But the public humiliation was just the opening act. The real assault began the next morning. I woke up not to my alarm, but to the incessant buzzing of my phone on the nightstand. It felt like an angry hornet was trapped in my room. I picked it up. Dozens of notifications from the neighborhood online chat. It was a massacre. Overnight, the forum had been flooded with posts, anonymous accounts, names I'd never seen before. Just saw a dead fish float by the shore near Mark's place. My dog got sick after drinking from the lake. Has anyone else had this problem? And the most insidious ones from people I knew. Mark was always a bit of a loner, wasn't he? Maybe he just doesn't care. They were building a narrative, painting me as a villain in real time. My real friends, the ones I thought I could count on, were silent. Either they were scared or they were starting to believe the lies. My reputation, built over 2 decades, was being dismantled in a matter of hours by a digital mob armed with gossip and fear. It was brutal, efficient, and completely out of my control. Later that afternoon, I was standing in my living room, staring out the window. I saw my next-door neighbor, Bill, out in his yard. We'd coached Little League together. I raised a hand to wave. He saw me. I know he did. For a second, he froze. Then, he turned his back, walked into his house, and I saw the curtains twitch shut. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a door slamming shut on my entire life here. The war wasn't just on paper or online anymore. It had become real. That night, the house felt different. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a fortress. And I was under siege, alone, with the glow of my phone showing another hateful message lighting up the dark. The glow of my phone showed another hateful message lighting up the dark. I tossed it on the couch. Staring at the screen wasn't going to solve anything. Facts hadn't worked. My reputation was shot. I needed a different kind of weapon. I needed a ghost. His name was George, and he'd been my mentor back when I was just a kid with a geology degree and too much confidence. He was a retired hydro engineer, a legend in the field, the kind of guy who could tell you the water table depth just by the way the grass grew. He lived about 30 minutes away, in a house that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. If anyone could see through Brenda's scheme, it was him. I found him in his study, a room so cluttered with maps and binders it looked like a library had exploded. He listened patiently, his face unreadable as I laid out the whole story. The red paint, the meeting, the online attacks. When I finished, he took a long, slow draw from his pipe. "You always did have a knack for kicking hornets' nests, Mark," he said, his voice a low rumble. He tapped the ash from his pipe into a tray. "You're looking for me to ride in on a white horse, tell everyone you're right and Brenda's a snake. I'm looking for the truth, George. You know my work. You know this is a fabrication." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than wry amusement in his eyes. It was disappointment. "I also know what happened at the Riverton project," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. The ghost I'd come to for help had just turned into the ghost I was running from. Riverton was my shame. A project where I'd been so focused on the data, I'd missed the political angle. I'd warned of a structural flaw in a dam, but I'd done it so abrasively, so publicly, that the company buried my report, and me along with it. My career never recovered. "That was different," I said, my voice tight. "Was it? You charge in, wave your facts around, and expect the world to bend. The world doesn't bend, Mark. It breaks you." He sighed, a cloud of sweet smoke filling the air. "I can't get involved directly. Your methods, they're too much like a wildfire. But," he turned and pulled a rolled-up yellow document from a tube in the corner. "Maybe you should do things by the book this time. The old book." He handed it to me. It was a topographical survey map of our area, dated 1973. It was brittle, almost like a dead leaf. This was before the development, before your house or Brenda's or any of it. Know the terrain, the real terrain. It felt like a dismissal, a riddle instead of an answer. I drove home feeling more alone than ever. But as I spread the old map out on my kitchen table, I saw something. A thin, blue line, hand-drawn, labeled agricultural drainage culvert. It snaked its way from the fields that used to be upslope, right through what was now our neighborhood, and ended directly in the lake. It wasn't on any of the modern plans. Officially, it didn't exist. My mind started racing. What if the problem wasn't my septic system, but something much older? I needed data, but my word was mud. So I decided to become a ghost myself. I called the only person I thought might help. Chloe, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She was a young IT specialist, one of those digital natives who probably came out of the womb knowing how to code. She was quiet, kept to herself. And I was betting she hated Brenda's manufactured drama as much as I did. I caught her on her porch. "Chloe, I have a weird favor to ask. I need a website, simple, anonymous, a place to post data without my name attached to it." She looked at me, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "Data? What kind of data?" "Water quality readings," I said. "I'm going to start testing the water from my well every day. I just need a place to put the numbers. No names, no accusations, just the raw data." She hesitated for a second, then gave a small, sharp nod. "Okay, it's a matter of public interest, right? Let's call it Lake Health Watch. No one has to know who's behind it." That night, for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger or despair. It might have been hope. I took my first water sample from my own well, a deep, clean source completely isolated from the septic system. I ran the analysis, and just as I expected, it was pristine. I sent the number to Chloe. An hour later, LakeHealthWatch.com was live, showing a single data point under the heading Well Water Purity Reading. It was a tiny whisper in a hurricane of noise, but it was a start. It was my first shot fired back from the shadows. I just hoped someone was listening. I just hoped someone was listening. For a week, it was my new ritual. Wake up, take a water sample, run it through the old fluorometer, and send the number to Chloe. The website grew, a quiet little line graph of pristine water readings, a silent testament to the truth. The online chatter against me died down a little, replaced by a confused curiosity about the anonymous site. But Brenda wasn't the type to let a mystery lie. She was a shark. She had to keep moving forward. I received another crisp envelope in the mail, a notice for an emergency vote to approve the contractor for the sewer replacement. The meeting was in 2 days. She was forcing the issue, trying to lock in the money before anyone could ask too many questions. This was my chance, I thought. I had a week of data. I had the old map, I could connect the dots for everyone, but Brenda, it turned out, was already 3 moves ahead. The night of the meeting, the hall was even more tense than before. Brenda took the stage and announced that, to ensure total transparency and expert oversight, she had invited a renowned independent consultant to review the situation and offer his professional opinion. My heart sank before he even walked out. It was George. He walked to the podium, avoiding my eyes. He looked older, smaller, under the harsh fluorescent lights. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He spoke about his credentials, his long career. Then he addressed the elephant in the room. "I'm aware," he said, his voice flat, "that there have been some alternative theories circulating online about the source of the contamination." He paused. "I want to be clear. While well-intentioned, the methods used to gather that data are unscientific. They are the work of an amateur, and they have no bearing on the professional assessment of the situation." The words hit me like a physical punch. Amateur. He had called me an amateur. The man who taught me everything was now publicly dismantling my credibility in front of the very people I was trying to save. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, that I couldn't even feel anger, just a hollow, ringing emptiness. The crowd stirred, nodding. They had their expert. They had their answer. George concluded by saying that, given the visual evidence and the potential risk, the board's recommendation to proceed with the replacement was prudent and necessary. He was giving them the green light. He was giving her the green light. Brenda's smile was predatory. "Thank you, George, for that clarity." She turned to the crowd. "Now, can I have a motion to approve the contract with Apex Restoration for the sum of $15,000 per affected household?" Hands shot up all over the room. It was unanimous. The motion passed. The contract was approved. It was over. I had been outmaneuvered, discredited, and defeated. As the crowd applauded, I saw Brenda give George a small, almost imperceptible nod. He nodded back. In that moment, I saw it all. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a coordinated attack. I stumbled out of the hall, not even waiting for the meeting to formally end. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Have you ever been so thoroughly beaten that you can't even see a way up? That was me. My mentor, my one last hope, had just handed Brenda the victory on a silver platter. As I walked across the dark parking lot, I noticed something that pulled me out of my haze. The contractor's truck. A big, shiny new pickup with Apex Restoration emblazoned on the side. And in the financial news app on my phone, a little notification I'd set up as a long shot buzzed. APXR, a small, publicly traded infrastructure company, had just jumped 5% in after-hours trading. Apex Restoration. The pieces were clicking together, but they were forming a picture far uglier than I could have imagined. This was never about a septic leak. This was a hustle, a big one. And my own mentor had just helped them pull it off. I drove home that night on autopilot. The image of George's nod burned into my mind. Betrayal has a cold, metallic taste. I'd spent my life trusting data, but I'd forgotten that people can be the most unpredictable variable of all. I ended up at the local dive bar, a place called the Rusty Anchor. It's the kind of place where no one asks questions and the whiskey is cheap. I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't my house, which now felt more like a cage. I sat in a dark corner booth, nursing a drink, trying to make sense of the wreckage. That's when I heard it. A loud, boastful laugh from a few tables over. I glanced up. It was him, the head contractor from Apex Restoration. He was with a couple of his buddies, celebrating their new contract. His back was to me, but his voice carried. He was drunk, arrogant, and loud. "You should have seen their faces," he slurred, clapping his friend on the back, lining up to hand over their money. And that old-timer she brought in, perfect, gave it that official stamp. He took a long gulp of his beer. "She's a genius, that Brenda, an absolute shark." I stayed perfectly still, trying to become part of the wood grain of the booth. This was it. The kind of break you only get when someone gets too comfortable. His friend leaned in. "But isn't it risky? What if they find out it's not the septic tanks?" The contractor laughed again, a wet, ugly sound. "Find out what? That the whole town's been dumping their storm runoff into an illegal drain for 50 years? By the time they figure that out, we'll be long gone." He lowered his voice, but I leaned in, straining to hear. Besides, this is just phase one. Once she forces out a few of these old-timers who can't afford the upgrades, we get first dibs on the properties. We're not selling sewer lines, you idiots. We're selling lakefront condos. The room tilted. It all crashed into place. The old map, the non-existent culvert, the fake emergency. This wasn't just a padded contract. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a civic project. Brenda wasn't just trying to make a quick buck. She was trying to steal people's homes. And the contamination. It was real, but she was blaming me for a problem she was actively exploiting. And then I understood George. My God, I understood. He hadn't betrayed me. He had protected me. By calling my methods amateur and my data unscientific, he had publicly discredited me. He made me look like a harmless crank. Why? Because if I had been seen as a credible threat, Brenda and her lawyers would have buried me in lawsuits. They would have sued me for slander, for interfering with a contract, for everything they could think of. George had sacrificed my pride to save me from a legal war I couldn't possibly win. He had taken the hit for me. He had played the part of the villain to give me cover. His final words to me echoed in my head. Do it by the book this time. The old book. He wasn't telling me to give up. He was telling me to change the game. Don't fight them on their terms. Fight them on yours. Find a different book. I felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it almost knocked me off my bar stool. The anger and despair were gone, burned away, and replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was bigger than my $15,000. This was about families being pushed out of their homes by a predator in a white SUV. I walked out of that bar a different man. The wounded victim was gone. In his place was a hunter. Brenda thought she had won. She thought I was broken, isolated, and silenced. But she didn't know what I now knew. She didn't know the real game we were playing, and she had no idea what a pissed-off hydrogeologist with nothing left to lose was capable of. The annual Fall Festival was in 2 days. It was the biggest town event of the year, held right on the shore of the lake she claimed I was poisoning. It was the perfect stage, and I had a little science experiment in mind. The next 48 hours were a blur. There was no more moping, no more staring out the window. There was only the plan. I spent hours poring over the old map, cross-referencing it with modern satellite images, tracing the ghost of that forgotten drainage culvert. I found where it had to be, a marshy, overgrown patch of land just behind the community beach, hidden by a thicket of cattails. Then I called Chloe. I need you for the main event, I told her, my voice tight with urgency. I need your tech skills and a drone. Can you get a drone? There was a pause on the other end of the line. How illegal is this? She asked, her voice a little shaky. Completely legal, I said. But it's going to feel like a heist. That was enough for her. The younger generation, they love a good heist. The day of the fall festival arrived, crisp and bright. The whole town was there. Music was playing, kids were running around with painted faces, and the smell of hot dogs and popcorn filled the air. It was a perfect picture of small-town harmony. A perfect lie. I saw Brenda near the makeshift stage, glad-handing everyone, looking every bit the benevolent town leader. She was soaking in her victory. The festival schedule had a slot for community announcements. Each resident was allowed 3 minutes. It was a rule she'd put in place herself. I love irony. As Brenda took the stage to give her keynote speech about protecting our beautiful lake, I gave Chloe the signal. She was set up near the back, her laptop open, the drone buzzing quietly in its case. On the other side of the lake, my wife, Sarah, was waiting by our back porch, her phone in hand, ready for my call. Brenda finished her speech to a round of polite applause. And now, she said, beaming, we have a few words from one of our neighbors, Mark. She said my name with a slight sneer, expecting me to come up and offer a pathetic apology. The crowd shifted, an awkward tension falling over them. They were expecting a train wreck. They were about to get one. I walked up to the microphone. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. Thank you, Brenda, I said, my voice calm and clear. I don't want to talk about assessments or bylaws today. Instead, I thought we could do a little science experiment for the kids. A few people chuckled nervously. Brenda's smile faltered. This wasn't in her script. My friend Chloe is going to help, I continued. Chloe, can you show us what you've got? On cue, a huge projector screen behind the stage. meant for showing a slideshow of community photos, flickered to life. It showed a live, high-definition, aerial view of the lake. The drone was up. The crowd murmured, intrigued. "Now," I said, pulling out my phone, "I'm going to call my wife." I put the phone on speaker. "Sarah, you there?" "I'm here, Mark." Her voice came through, clear and strong. "Can you do me a favor? We have this bucket of, let's call it special green juice. It's a completely harmless, biodegradable tracer dye. Can you pour it into our septic tank access port for me?" On the screen, the drone zoomed in on my backyard. We all watched as Sarah lifted a 5-gallon bucket and emptied a stream of vibrant, almost cartoonishly green liquid into the ground. I turned back to the crowd. "Now, according to the Homeowners Association, my septic system is leaking directly into the lake. So, if they're right, we should start to see that green dye seeping into the water right around my property. Let's watch." We all stared at the screen. The drone panned slowly along my shoreline. Nothing. The water was clear. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes. Still nothing. The crowd was getting restless. Brenda crossed her arms, a smug look returning to her face. I could almost hear her thinking, "He's failing," in front of everyone. "Well," I said into the mic, feigning disappointment. "Maybe it takes a little longer, or maybe—" I let the word hang there. "Chloe, can you fly the drone over to that marshy area by the public beach, about 200 yards down?" The drone shot across the lake. The screen showed the overgrown patch of cattails I'd identified from the map. The drone descended, its camera piercing through the reeds. And then we saw it. A torrent of brilliant green water was gushing out of a large, crumbling concrete pipe, hidden beneath the brush. It was pouring directly into the lake, creating a massive, sickening plume of green. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was so vivid, so undeniable. I didn't have to say a word. The screen told the whole story. The pollution wasn't coming from my house. It was coming from this hidden illegal pipe, the same pipe the contractor had bragged about. I looked over at Brenda. The color had drained from her face. Her mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. She was staring at the screen, at the irrefutable neon green proof of her lie, broadcast for the entire town to see. "You wanted to save the lake, Brenda?" I thought. "Let's see what's really killing it." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. It was the sound of 100 people recalibrating reality. The hero was a villain. The villain was a victim. And the pristine lake they were so proud of was being fed by a secret sewer. The green plume on the screen wasn't just dye, it was the truth, spreading like a stain. My 3 minutes were up. I set the microphone back in its stand, my hand steady. I didn't look at Brenda. I didn't need to. I looked at the crowd, at my neighbors. Their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and a slow, dawning anger. Not at me anymore, at her. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Brenda. Before the festival was even over, people were on their phones, not to post on the neighborhood chat, but to call the county, the State Environmental Protection Agency, and a couple of local news outlets. My little anonymous website, Lake Health Watch, suddenly had thousands of hits. Chloe had uploaded the drone footage. There was no hiding from it. Within a week, a formal letter arrived not from the Homeowners Association, but from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. An investigation was being launched. All association activities were frozen. The special assessment was void. The Apex restoration contract was worthless. Brenda's house of cards had been blown down by a gust of green dye. A few days later, she called me. Her voice was unrecognizable. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a thin, desperate plea. "Mark," she said, "I'll resign. I'll make sure the board drops the whole thing, pays for any of your legal fees. Just call them off, retract the complaint to the EPA." And there it was, the ethical fork in the road, the easy way out. I could take the personal victory, get my money back, and let the whole thing fade away. Go back to my quiet mornings on the porch. Have you ever been offered a simple solution to a complex problem? A clean exit when you're covered in mud? It's tempting. It's so damn tempting. But I thought about the families she was planning to push out. I thought about the years of lies. I thought about the smug look on her face when she marked my tree. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed with a private deal. "No, Brenda," I said, and the words felt solid, real. "We're going to see this through, all of us." I hung up. At the next town meeting, the atmosphere was entirely different. It wasn't in the stuffy hall, it was outside, by the lake. I was no longer the defendant. They had asked me to speak. I didn't bring a briefcase full of papers this time. I just brought my old fluorometer, the tool that had once been a symbol of my failure, the one George warned me about. I walked to the water's edge, dipped the probe in, and held it up for everyone to see the digital display. The numbers were shockingly high, confirming years of contamination from that hidden pipe. "This isn't about one person's septic tank," I said, my voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "This is about a system that was allowed to fail, a system of trust." My old tool wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was an instrument of truth. In that moment, I wasn't just a hydrogeologist. I was a member of a community again. They voted me onto the new interim board that night. We initiated a full audit, uncovered the condo scheme, and started the long, expensive process of fixing the problem for real. I had won. But victory, I learned, isn't a finish line. It's just a different kind of beginning. My friendship with some neighbors was permanently fractured. The quiet respect I once had was replaced by a kind of wary admiration. I was the guy who had saved them, but I was also the guy who had torn their comfortable world apart. I saw George in the back of the crowd. He didn't come over. He just gave me a slow, single nod. A passing of the torch. A week later, I was on my porch. The air was cool. The red cross on my oak was still there, faded now, like a scar. I had saved the tree. I had saved my home. But the easy quiet I used to cherish felt different. It was heavier. It was the quiet of solitude. The price of the fight. Victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the silence that comes after the storm, when you're the only one left standing, and you have to decide if it was worth it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was it?